with wildlife, any rabies vector cannot be relocated further than a kilometer, because what was happening was back 30 years ago, 25 years ago, people were catching animals that had rabies without realizing it. Say you're in the city of Toronto, the outskirts, and you caught a rabid raccoon, didn't know, decide, I don't want this at my place, but you know what? I'll drop it off on my way to my cottage. Well, they take it 85 or 95 or whatever, 150 kilometers away. And before they get to their cottage, they drop it off in the bush. Well, now you just exposed rabies to a whole area that could have been completely clean.
You're listening to the Behind the Village podcast. Our guest today is Will McIntosh from Exit Wildlife and Pest Control. Yeah, why don't you start by telling me what Exit Wildlife, I guess the full name of it, and what is it that you guys do?
So we're Exit Wildlife and Pest Control. Basically, our main aim of the game is when people have animal issues or bug issues, we're aiming to alleviate your problem. The best way that, according to the customer, like the problem is a lot of companies will come forward and say, well, this is the way we're going to do it. And your options are limited. We try to give people a couple additional options to give them a bit of to relax in the situation, because I've had times where I've had people say, oh, you were so informative and you opened up to us, a different viewpoint. Whereas I had another company here and the guy just walked in, he didn't explain anything. We told him our problem. He says, I'll take care of it. And he didn't tell us what he did. He didn't explain to us what he did. He just did it. And and then I came in and I explained to them what he did, and I actually had to fix some of the stuff he did. And then they're like, well, I wish we'd called you first. And I said, well, that's a very strong compliment, but sometimes you make a phone call and you get a company, and sometimes they know what they're doing and sometimes they don't. But our main aim for the business is to, if you have a pain point, we try to fix it for you, and animal wise and bug wise. Yeah.
Yeah, so you guys do animal control, because I was looking at your website, right? You guys do animal control management as well,
Yeah.
and prevention,
Yeah.
and as well as pest control. So what do those three kind of services mean, like for animal specifically, and then pest control, right?
So animal control, there's a couple different ways of an approach. Like I mentioned, people will have a pain point, but the problem is with the pain point is you already have a problem. Animal control can be two different facets. You can have the facet where I have a problem and I need a solution, or you can have what we in the business call prevention, where you don't ever want to have a problem, so you address the potentiality for it beforehand. And so, to give an example, I've had lots of times where someone gets a raccoon in their roof and it got through a roof vent. Well, I've explained to people, whether it was neighbors to that person or other people just in generic conversation, if that roof vent was not a danger point to begin with, then you wouldn't have to worry about the raccoon getting in your roof. So that's kind of where the prevention arises from, is if you're worried about an animal problem, don't wait for it to become a problem. I've get calls, oh, I got a raccoon on my deck. Should I be worried? Well, yeah, a raccoon's hanging around on your deck. It's probably seeking somewhere to break in. So the two different points is we approach from wildlife removal, where you already have a problem. It happens to a lot of people. We get the animal to come out of the structure or under a deck or shed or wherever it is. And then our main aim is to stop that from happening again. But we're trying to be more informative on the animal side, where you can prevent it from happening, period. Within a scope, obviously, if your roof is uh got a hole in the middle of it, then there's more to that than just putting a couple of screens over your roof fence.
You have bigger problems if your roof has a hole.
Exactly. Like I've run into that. We've done preventative work for someone. They call back, I got a raccoon in my attic. You said that there wouldn't be any raccoons in my attic. I go there, and there was a 12 by 14-inch hole right in the center of his roof. And I went down. I said, I'll get the raccoon out, but you need to call a roofing company now, because this is going to be a nonstop issue till you replace your whole roof. So that's where, when I say preventative, we prevent the main points of entry: roof soffit intersections, roof vents. We get crawl spaces. We get other things like underneath doors and the like for even squirrels. People could say, oh, there's a little gap under my door, not a big deal. Well, a squirrel can fit through there. Now, the pesticide side of things, that's more aligned towards animals like rodents, rats, and mice. And then we run into things like spiders, earwigs, crickets, ants. We do a lot of ant work. Carpenter ants are a big problem around here. I get a lot of calls for them in the summer. Um, we haven't branched into a lot of bugs like bed bugs and cockroaches yet. That's on the table. We're doing more research and training and stuff for that because they're a little bit more intense, and you need a little bit more customer cooperation. And so we're kind of getting training on that as well, where what to tell the customer to inform them properly of the steps they have to take, because most of the time in pesticide control, we do everything. But when it comes to cockroaches and it comes to bed bugs, you need a bit of a customer cooperation. And if you don't inform them properly, they're not going to enact properly, and then you're back to square one. So that takes a bit more training and a bit more finesse, as it were.
Interesting. So when it comes to pest control, a question just kind of popped into my head. Is it the same as with animal control? Can you actually prevent or manage, I guess, the idea of like pests, like ants and stuff like that? Because um, I live in a house that is maybe 5 years old. Like it's not that new, but it's not that old either. And we do get ants every once in a while, and I always just we get ant traps, or we get whatever it is that we do, and it's just kind of it. Like we just hope that they disappear, and then we'll expect them next summer, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so from a standpoint for bugs, the preventative nature for bugs, there is a bit of a practical side to it that can be done to help with entry into the house, but because bugs are so small, you kind of have to have, basically, to rewind a bit on that. If, let's say, you have cluster flies, so right now it's warm, they're waking up, as it were. So you'll come out in especially in older farmhouses or older structure buildings that were built like early 1900s or even 1800s. um you'll wake up in the morning and there's flies everywhere, and you're like, well, my windows are closed, my doors are closed. I don't know why there's flies everywhere. Well, what happens is those flies got in the fall, right? So
hmm,
if you want to stop the cluster flies in the spring, you need to beat them in the fall. We can't fix it in the spring. We can knock them down.
interesting.
We can lessen the population of your structure, but they're just going to keep piling out because they're in the walls, the ceiling, under the floor, depending on the structure. They're coming from everywhere, and to beat them, and this is the same pattern also with wildlife. To beat the animal or the bug at their own game, you have to start from the outside, because that's where they come from. You don't have animals spontaneously growing in your house. Usually, sometimes you get your own little ecosystem developing, but again, it started from the outside. Um, so in the instance for the cluster fly, you're going to have to reference back to the fall, where you say, listen, we'll spray all areas of entry that these flies can get to. So by the time the flies try to attempt to get in, they die. So basically, you're focusing on the pain point, as I mentioned earlier. You've got your pain point of, I am vacuuming flies every day in the spring by spraying in the fall. So that's kind of a preventative measure you can take. With ants and the like, they're a little harder to do because they can come from underground. They can kind of, work their way around the foundation and stuff, but you still can do preventative work. Like you said, you buy those little ant traps. Um, some companies, and ourselves included, we can provide ant traps before they come in your house. So if they do show up, they might get killed off before you even see them. So there's a few steps, and it's very subject specific, because like certain bugs are only active for a very short period of time. Like earwigs are midsummer, right? But you will never see them in the spring or early summer. They're more midsummer, late summer, early fall. Whereas wasps don't become a huge issue to the fall, right? So each kind of has their own specific time span. We have one customer, she has us come and spray 3 times a year. We spray her whole structure for wasps because she's allergic. Well, she doesn't get any wasps building on her house. She doesn't have any wasps landing on her house because if they do, they're gonna die. So she kind of beats it to the punch because she doesn't want to be going, oh shoot, I have a nest up there. I might get stung. I could die. I'll just get them to spray. So if a wasp tries to land there and make a nest, it's not going to be around for very long.
Interesting. So for wildlife, like I've heard a lot, like I've heard of pest control businesses, I guess, before. Like I know I get at least of a couple, but I've never actually heard of an animal like wildlife control. And I don't know if it's just because I've never had the opportunity to try and find one, or I've never had one in my house that I need to actually deal with it. But I've always assumed that whenever you have an issue, you just kind of go to Home Depot, get a trap, get something, right? Let's say it's mice or let's say it's whatever. And then you just, uh, I don't know, deal with it. Like, I don't know. So I guess how does that like how did you get into this business, right? And how did you find this?
Yeah. So basically, how I got into the business was I had always wanted to work with animals since I was a kid. I you can ask if you were to ask my parents, I'd go to the library, and the first place I would zip to would be the animal section and the bug section. And it kind of got to the point where the librarian knew I was coming in, and she would be like, "Oh yeah, there's a new book." Because and we're talking like encyclopedia books of bugs and encyclopedia books on mammals and reptiles, amphibians, and I just constantly my I think partly what triggered it was when I was a kid, a little kid, my grandma would put Animal Planet on, and that I was just fascinated watching the African animals and the snakes and the guys handling them, and people like Steve Irwin and Jeff
Yeah, yeah,
Corwin.
yeah.
These guys, they were my hero, right? You know, the crocodile hunter, and I always thought how cool that would be to be able to handle animals as your job, not just for fun, but you can actually do it and you're helping, whether you're helping an environmentalist factor or you're helping people. I thought that'd be so cool. So I, for years, wanted to get into it. Didn't know how. I did research on along the lines of like schooling and stuff, but back then there was a little. It was a little less. It was more like you had to get hired and get trained, kind of thing. And I didn't know where to start with that, and it just so happened my dad got a hold of a number where someone was looking to hire someone, and that's what in the wildlife control. He didn't do pest control; he did wildlife control specifically, and that's kind of what got my foot in the door, working for him, and it opened my eyes to the whole fact like everyone has their own separate approach, right? Of like how you said, you go to Home Hardware, you buy a trap, you know. So when I walked in, and my eyes were kind of open that there's a whole lot more behind the scenes than just buying a live trap or a package of rat traps and trying to take care of the problem yourself. He opened my eyes to the fact that there's so much you can do that doesn't even involve handling the animal, which is less stressful for the animal involved and less stressful for the people involved. Um, so that's how I got my foot in the door, as it were, in the business. And then just after I was in that for a little bit, COVID hit, and so
Right.
it got
Of
real
course.
crazy real fast, and we were essential business. So we were working, we were buying all the random stuff for like, what do you wear, what do you put on your body? Like, we didn't know what to do because we were we had people calling us say, can you get the raccoon babies out of my attic without going into my house? And I'm like, I So that was actually a wild learning curve. You kind of learned on the fly because like you couldn't travel in the same truck anymore with your the person you were training with and all that stuff. So I kind of super speed learned on the fly. And then once COVID kind of dissipated, I realized that like I really enjoyed this work. Like outside of the stress of COVID-19, I really enjoyed this work. And I decided that, you know what, I want to be an entrepreneur in this. It'd be really exciting to have your own business and kind of call the shots, as it were, on certain aspects or certain principles. Some businesses are very content where they are, and that's fine. But for me, I was always kind of like, well, can we push this? Well, can we push that? And the management was kind of like, so I said to myself, well, okay, I took it some time off, went and worked in another field for a bit of time, didn't enjoy it, and realized I gotta see if I can do this on my own. And that's when I teamed up with my
This is your
father.
calling.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's how kind of Exit Wildlife was created, right? Like it's you and your dad, Jeff. He's the
Yeah.
one. He's the other co owner of Exit Wildlife. And when did you guys kind of start?
So that was the winter of 2020, yeah, 2021, 2022. We started gearing things up for the business. We officially launched the business that spring of 2022. So we're now on our official third season this year.
Nice.
It was one of those things where my dad had stepped down from a role that he had been working in. We were both kind of looking at each other going, well, he knows my interest in animals, and he's been entrepreneur minded his whole life. So for it was kind of a no-brainer saying, well, I'll run behind the scenes and figure all this stuff out if you get all the equipment, supplies, and all that stuff together. And then we'll put our heads together and we'll launch from there. So he's trained me in a bunch of entrepreneur approaches, sales things, sales tactics, and the like too. He was into sales for a few years, so he understands the customer's desire without pushing them past their comfortability with what they need. And I'm all geared towards. I showed him the whole animal side of things, where um, you're running all the issues that you're going to run into from the day to day, and it's kind of a fun. It's kind of fun, honestly, because he'll say something and to a customer, and I'll be like, "The customer gonna be cool with that," and the customer loves it, right? And I'm like, oh, like that's something he's just so familiar with people for he's been around longer than I have in that industry. And then the same for me is I will be doing a job and a raccoon will run by and he'll be like, we're about to get bit. I said, no, we're fine. Right. So we kind of I kind of speak more animal a bit in that instance. But yeah, we kind of really shake hands, as it were, in the industry of a balance between the two aspects of entrepreneur approach and the practical wildlife control.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty awesome. And you specifically have been, your love for animals, like you kind of told me ever since you were little, and you kind of trained to be this, I guess, trained into the industry and kind of became like a wildlife expert. Is there any sort of like how do you? I guess I'm trying to figure out how you sort of how does the industry work, I guess, is my actual question. Like, there because I don't know enough about this industry. Like, you're the only animal control, like, company that I know. So
Yeah.
what is the industry usually like? Right? And what do you do that's different?
So basically, in the pesticide side of things, it's very regulated, right down to 0.01% of a pesticide in an additional substance to allow it to be used. So like water per se. Um, we have measurements that are that detailed, and it's a legality thing. Like if they find out that you use too much pesticides, you can get in big trouble. So there's sometimes a little bit of breathing room along those lines, but like that's just how like intricate it is down to I've got my landscape spraying license as well as structural. And the landscape is more protecting plants and things, and each one, you might be using 600-gallon tanks of pesticide, and you might use half a liter of pesticide for that 600-gallon tank. Like, it can be that minimal, and so it's
Wow.
very, very regulated. The labels on the pesticides are law. It's law. They always tell you, reference the label. The label is the law. So if something else says something different, you go to the label. You do not listen to the outside source. You stick to the label. If you know the business, or you know someone that's in the business, you've probably heard that 1,000 times. Wildlife side of things, until recently, a little bit been the Wild West, and it's been a bit
Right.
of a frustration, because I've run into situations where I get customers that are so frustrated, where they call someone, the person shows up, says, "Oh, I'll take care of your raccoon or squirrel or whatever problem you've got," and they'll do a very, well, to put it plainly, a very poor job. Because from a standpoint of an assumption, it works. But if you know a raccoon, you'll know that putting chicken wire over a roof vent with 3-inch galvanized nails on plywood is not going to work at all.
Right.
I've seen it. I've had to fix it. I had one customer pay more than I charged for that job than I would have charged for the proper job. And she was very upset. I had to take pictures and showed her what was done, because it's your roof, right? You don't know what's going on your roof. Most people can't see the top of their roof, so they have no idea what's going on. And so I get up there, and the raccoon had torn, because they can chew through chicken wire. It had torn through the chicken wire and ripped the roof vent off. Um,
Wow.
so that kind of thing, it's a bit of a wild west, which is why it's very helpful to get training, from a reputable company. There isn't really any training from the government body for it yet. And that's just kind of straight up. Like, it's not, someone goes, "Well, are you licensed to be a wildlife operator?" There's no such thing. It's coming down the pike. It is coming.
Yeah, that's good.
There's an aim. We've actually had conversations in the industry of the pesticide, where we're hoping at some point to maybe have, to blossom from that, have an association for the wildlife control. But up until this point, we sometimes get a bad rap because people do some pretty shady stuff that doesn't help the customer, isn't necessarily humane, isn't legal. There are legality issues with wildlife control that you have to be aware of, but from a license standpoint, there's no such thing as of today, anyway.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say, that, from I've heard from, I think it was Jeff that was the one that told me, but there are certain legalities, I guess. There are certain things that you can and cannot do with animals. So it's not like it's wildlife, and like it's the Wild West, I guess, from the sounds of it, in terms of the training that you need for it. But there are some regulations kind of attached to what you can and cannot do with animals. So talk to me about that.
So along the lines of regulations, it's a very, like I said, even though there are regulations, as it is in all lines of the most work careers and things you do, there's loopholes, or it doesn't make a little black and white. Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, there's a gray area, of misunderstanding. One thing that people are not familiar with, so in this line of work, all the time, we get to someone's house. Can you trap and remove the animal? Can you catch it in a cage and take it out of my house? Well, the problem with that is, there's a couple different problems, but I'll give you the legality part of it. From a legal standpoint, if it's a rabies vector, which means a warm-blooded creature with saliva glands, so birds don't count. They don't. It's just their blood's not warm enough and all that stuff. But they're different. But like, you get like reptiles, they can't get rabies, so they're not in the same. And plus, birds, they can fly wherever they want anyway. But with wildlife, any rabies vector cannot be relocated further than a kilometer, because
Interesting.
what was
Well,
happening was back 30 years ago, 25 years ago, people were catching animals that had rabies without realizing it. Say you're in the city of Toronto, the outskirts, and you caught a rabid raccoon, didn't know, decide, I don't want this at my place, but you know what? I'll drop it off on my way to my cottage. Well, they take it 85 or 95 or whatever, 150 kilometers away. And before they get to their cottage, they drop it off in the bush. Well, now you just exposed rabies to a whole area that could have been completely clean. So a
um,
lot of work has gone into rabies prevention. A lot of work has gone into vaccinations. They drop thousands upon thousands of vaccinated food packs, especially in the Niagara region, the border where we share with the U.S. The U.S. doesn't have a very good rabies program, so they're constantly hammering that area so that if any animals cross the border, they'll get inoculated. Uh, but it can happen down to the point of people don't realize like a raccoon can hitch a ride on the truck and go 500 kilometers before it gets off. And that can transfer rabies, right? So they're very, very stringent, it's very particular. Relocation of an animal 1 kilometer, 99% of people look at me and go, well, that's not far enough. And I said, it's not, but that's the point is that's the animals most mammals home range is 1 kilometer given or about that's a 3 or 4 depends on the species, like foxes will go further than a skunk, but for the most part it's 1 kilometer, and you can't relocate past that from a legality standpoint. And that's something that's across the board. There's no like you can't go, oh well, if no. So that's something that in the business we'll run into individuals, that's what they do. And they give us a bad name because one, they're doing it wrong. And two, I come to you, say June, and I say, well, I can't relocate your raccoon. And you say, well, this guy does.
right. So I'm gonna go with this guy.
Well, you're gonna go with that guy. Or I have to tell you that Buddy's breaking the law, which then makes me look like a tattletale. You know what I'm saying? It's not a good look. And it's really poor
Mhm.
along our lines of work because the professionalism just gets washed down the drain immediately.
But
So
that's really interesting though to hear about the reason why there's that kilometer. It's due to rabies basically prevention, which is really awesome.
yeah.
To hear that at least it's being tried to kept in a specific location so that it could be dealt with. Yeah, I guess locally in
Yeah.
that sense. But how does that, I guess, how does that change the way that it should be properly removing animals then, right? Because that, like you said, that kind of poses that question is like, okay, I have a raccoon in my attic, or I have, I don't know, an opossum, a rabbit, like whatever that I want removed, the squirrel that I want removed. How does that work now,
So
right?
this
What is it that I need to do then?
partly what I say to people. Um, the thing is, so say in an instance, a customer has a raccoon that's in their attic. Let's say that it was legal to move said raccoon 20 kilometers. So I scoop up said raccoon, I charge you whatever the fee was set upon, and I take raccoon for a 20-kilometer drive. Couple days later, another raccoon's walking along and smells the pheromones from the raccoon that was in your attic. Now, Mr. Raccoon's going to check out what's going on. There's a raccoon nearby. I'm going to see what's up. Raccoon follows his nose onto your roof and proceeds to go in the exact same spot because you didn't want it fixed. You just want the animal removed. Now you got another
Oh,
raccoon in your attic, which then begs to begs the question. The customer calls and says you didn't take the raccoon far enough away. And I would say, well, there's 6 rivers between you and that raccoon. Uh, that's a different raccoon altogether.
mm,
Plus, if I'm setting a trap to catch a raccoon, how do you know I got the right one to begin with?
that's true. It's not like there's like names or anything.
Exactly. If you have a raccoon in your attic, You might have 5 or 6 in the vicinity, and I catch the wrong one. How do you know? I can't I can't tell you unless it's covered in insulation. I can't tell you that it came out of your attic. I have no clue, right? So that point is a bit of an understanding for customers where relocation doesn't actually solve your problem. You live in nature, nature lives with you. You need to find a peaceable middle point where I can have a raccoon in my backyard and not freak out that it's going to be in my attic because it can't get into my attic, period. Same thing with squirrels. I had a customer. He obviously didn't know about the rabies rule, not to be able to relocate. And he told me he caught 23 squirrels and he
Ooh,
relocated
that's a
them
lot.
north about 40 clicks. He didn't get the
Wow.
ones in his attic. His neighbor came over and said, "You notice the squirrel population's getting kind of low around here?" And he's like, because he kept thinking, "I'll eventually get him. I'll eventually get him." Well, I went up there and I set up our removal system, and the squirrels popped out, and within 24 hours. So he had invested weeks of time in trying to collect these squirrels that were in his attic, and he never got the right ones. There was 2 or 3 still in his attic. He never got the right ones. So that's a big pitch for us is, yes, relocation does seem effective, but it's a temporary fix. It's a sticking a finger in the dike, as it were, when there's holes everywhere, as in that as an example.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's kind of what it reminded me is like, yeah, like relocation looks good in the short term because it's out of here. I can see there's an animal that you're leaving with. And it's like that
Yes,
makes me feel better. But that
exactly,
doesn't get solve the problem of how they entered in the first place, right?
exactly.
Why did they enter in the first place? So that's kind of the real problem there is now is trying to fix what was it that caused the animal to enter the home or to, make a nest or do whatever it is in the first place so that that doesn't happen again. That's really interesting. I never thought about it that way.
Yeah, and it's something that, to go full circle, you're to protect your home, you have to protect the outside. You're not gonna have a raccoon, well, I shouldn't say that because I've had a raccoon open a door before, but raccoons typically don't open doors and walk in your front door, right? They're usually breaking in from a weak point, and, that's something that you have to be aware of. Every home, for the most part, I'd say 95% to 100% of homes will have weak areas that are common that the animals will target. And people wonder, well, why did they target them? Raccoons learn from their mothers. So if they're born in an attic, raised in an attic, and leave the attic, they're familiar with the smells, the temperature, the structure, the whole works.
That's right.
So what
Right.
a raccoon will do, we'll use a raccoon as the example. It'll get on a roof and start crawling around, feeling for warm spots. It finds a warm spot, it's going to try to get in there. And if that warm spot happens to be a weak spot, all of a sudden you have a tenant that you don't want. Same with squirrels, same with mice, same with bats, same with all house invading creatures. Bugs, everyone goes, "Why do the bugs want to live in my house?" Well, it's warm. It's a controlled environment. It's a safe environment. They get in there. A raccoon gets in there, its only other problem is another raccoon. No other animal is gonna bother it. You're not gonna get a coyote or a wolf or a dog bothering it in an attic. It's perfectly safe. From that point, it's not good for them to be in the insulation, but they don't know that. And it's perfect nesting material. So it's something where people have to realize to protect your home is not to eliminate the wildlife. It's to find the perfect harmony between wildlife being on, yeah, a raccoon could be on your roof. That's fine because it's not going to get in anywhere anyway. Because I had the wildlife guy come out and he sealed up all the weak spots on my house.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very interesting. And, what a lot of people don't know because you'd be the expert on that, but is what those weak points kinda look like so that you can kind of fix it, prevention, right?
Yes, exactly, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. On top of, my realization that I had just now about, how wildlife, works, right? I had another question as to, like, so what are the common misconceptions that people generally have about, I guess, wildlife removal? Maybe that because we just talked about one, right? The fact that you can't just taking them out, right? One is illegal, but removing them and putting them like somewhere else isn't going to solve the problem. What other misconceptions that people tend to usually have when it comes to removal
Well,
or wildlife in general?
the misconceptions that I've run across a lot. I could burn up a whole podcast just on misconceptions. So I'll pick a couple that are usually the heavy hitters. It's okay to have the animal in my attic. That's a huge misconception we run into more often than you'd realize. I had a situation, gentleman had squirrels in his attic for 20 years. He thought it was okay.
Wow.
And then one day the squirrels decided that they had enough of the attic and they chewed through his ceiling.
Wow.
I had another situation with a gentleman. He had a bird nest in his soffit. Didn't think anything of it. The birds left, and the problem with the birds, that particular bird species is, well, most bird species in general, but that particular species, because they're in the soffit, um, when they get into the soffit, they're covered in mites, and the mites, once the baby birds hatch, the mites spread amongst the nesting material because of the heat of the baby birds. Well, the baby birds will suddenly fly away. Like it'll go from they're in the nest and they're gone the next day. It's that quick. Well, the mites aren't gone because they're in the nest. Well, where do the mites go? And I had a customer, the mites found him,
Oh,
and
wow.
he woke up in the middle of the night and the mites had found him, and he would just
Wow.
absolutely lost his marbles, as he should have, because I would have done the same. He's covered in
Yeah.
these bugs, and he has no idea why. And I'm on the phone with them, and then I realize he had a bird nest in the soffit just outside of his bedroom. And for him, he vacuumed his bed, and then he had to shut up the room, and he had to leave it for a couple weeks because mites don't last too long. They last, I think, 2 weeks without a food source, and then they die. So he had to he had to sleep in his living room for 2 weeks because of birds and the soffit, right? So that's a solid misconception. Not to mention damage, just straight up damage they'll do to your house. I've gone into attics where all the insulation was this thick from being tread upon, and cut
Right.
feces and
Yeah. The
urine.
animals just like
The animals pat it
yeah.
down, and I've seen staining through ceilings. I've had situations where raccoons ripped off roof vents, and it snowed and rained, and the whole ceiling collapsed. Like just things that you go, oh well, is it a big deal? Yes, yes, it is a big deal. The thing that, and just as an asterisk for anyone, if you're listening to this and you're going, oh my goodness, it is a big deal the longer it is. Initial entry typically isn't a big deal because they haven't been up there very long. They haven't had enough time to settle in, make a bathroom, as it were, in your attic. Water's not flowing. They do. Certain species have little. You go and there's little piles of droppings in certain spots. That's their toilet.
Interesting.
They do that. Another misconception that you'll run into in the wildlife industry. Um, oh, let me think now. There's a couple more to come. Um, they'll just go away. That's another misconception. They don't, especially baby season. Um, if an animal successfully rears its young in a location, it will be back next year, guaranteed. Unless something happens to that animal, if it dies or is injured, it will be back 100% because it was successful rearing. It raised its young, and now it's safe. So it knows in its brain that that's a safe location. It's going to come back. Um, Another misconception is that wildlife control is cruel. That's a big misconception. A lot of people come. I've had a few people gun for me saying, "Well, you hurt the animals, blah blah blah." It does me no credence to harm an animal. We always have this running joke that the animal, if you if it the animal is going to move on and you might be able to find it again later. You know what I'm saying? We always kind of joke about that in the industry. It's not really a thing, but we joke about it. But harming an animal, I'm in this industry because I love animals.
Right.
You'll see, like, when we remove babies from an attic, we make sure that the mother has complete access to the babies, and 90% of the time, she'll find them and she takes them away. There's many times where people are like, "Oh, are they gonna die?" And I'm like, "You're gonna come out here in the morning and there's gonna be no babies." And they come out in the morning and they're gone. She comes out and she takes each one away, whether it's a squirrel or skunk or possum, or they're all strong maternal instincts. Um, Sometimes you'll do run the risk of animal harm in the sense of when there are babies, sometimes can be inclement weather and such, but if you don't remove the animal, your home's at risk. So sometimes you have to weigh the balance of the risk to the animal to the risk of your home, because the last thing you need is a raccoon landing in your bathtub. That's that's that. So, but for the most part, like it's our mission for those animals to survive. It's our mission to protect your home. So we know we're not cruel. We never add additional harm to an animal ever. It's not a thing. We don't harm an animal to try. No, it's we stay within the legal boundaries. We stay within humane boundaries, conscience boundaries. I love animals. I wish no harm to them, if at all possible. Um, so yeah, we that's another misconception, and then let me come up with one more. Another misconception is fix it myself. That is the biggest, most damaging, most frustrating for a wildlife company. All due respect to people that DIYers, I myself am a DIYer on stuff. Do not try to fix it yourself. You might get lucky and you put a piece of plywood on the roof and the raccoon happened to not be in there that night. You might get lucky that the squirrel just so happened to be out gathering nuts when you cover that hole. But I'm telling you, the damage I've seen, the frustration I've seen, um, do not, do not think that you can just fix it on your own. And people say, well, of course you're saying that. The amount of times someone's covered a hole, you see, you have to understand when you have an animal in your attic, that animal's mission is to survive. That's why it's in your attic in the first place. If you cover a hole, all right, and a raccoon, or let's say, so I'll give you an example that I have experienced personally. Raccoon goes out to get food for her babies. You come along and you cover the hole. Now you're not familiar, you're not aware that she has babies at this point.
Mhm.
I have seen raccoons rip shingles down to the plywood along, we're talking like
Wow.
20 feet. She will do whatever it takes to get back in. You want to talk about distress to an animal? I've seen I have come back and there's blood everywhere because they were trying to get in so bad they cut themselves. And they will get in.
Wow.
They they will get in. So you see a hole in your roof and you think you got a raccoon, don't. I had another customer, they took a piece of plywood and they laid 2 bricks on it. She rolled those bricks off of that plywood like it was nothing. They will get in and they will do what it takes because their maternal instinct is that strong. Squirrels, they'll just chew. They'll chew and chew and chew and chew and chew and chew. And whether they chew through the wall, they chew through your siding, they chew through your asphalt shingles. I've seen them chew through aluminum, right through aluminum to get back in, to get to their babies. Do not,
Wow.
do not try to solve the problem. On the pesticide side of things, a misconception, like you mentioned, you go and get the little ant traps for your ant problem. There are particular ant species where if you try to spray them, say you get a can of Raid, right? You go over the counter at Home Hardware, you go and pick up a can of Raid. There are species of ants where if you spray them, their population will go from double to triple. Because what happens is
Wow.
when an animal when a bunch of ants die, they pick up on it and they run away. They spread out. And you see, in an ant world, spreading out might be moving 15 feet, right? It's not for us, it's like 4 steps, but for them, that's a journey. So when they spread out, a lot of these ant colonies have multiple queens, and the queens will spread out. And within a very short period of time, you went from one colony to 3. There did some tests where they actually, I think it was 8 times. They went from 1 colony to 8, and they went from having about an estimated 100,000 ants to 800,000 ants because they sprayed. And they've
Wow.
done test after test on this because they couldn't believe it. They were like, "What? We thought we're taking care of the problem." They have special products out now that are indetectable for some species of ants, but do not go, "Oh, I'm just gonna" it won't work. You'll only kill about 10% of them, and there's a very real possibility you just made them go from your kitchen to now to your bedroom or downstairs in your basement. So be very careful. If someone says, "Oh, use this, use that," just call a company to come and take a look. You don't have to have them do the work, but I would advise it. And I'll do one more because this is actually really important for people to understand. Rats. Do not
Yeah.
try to handle rats by yourself. Every time I've had someone try to handle rats by themselves, it got so much worse. I've had people call me and say, "I was trying to trap rats. I thought it was mice. I just created a bunch of trap shy rats. I can't catch them anymore, and I don't know what to do." And I said, "Well, what do you mean you created rat shy, like trap shy rats?" And they said, "Well, we use mouse traps, and they got caught in the mouse traps, and they didn't like that, so they stopped going for all our bait. They won't go for anything anymore."
Oh, interesting.
And so we had to come in and we had to work a multi-week, not day, week program to to basically reprogram the rats so that they weren't shy of the traps. We had to install baiting stations. We had to use different kinds of bait because they had also got the rat shy of bait because they bought over the counter bait. And the problem with over the counter bait is if they eat it and they don't eat enough, it won't kill them. It'll just make them sick. So they won't eat it again. So they
Mm.
had created this storm because they were trying to fix it themselves, which I respect. I'm not saying that, you're a bad person, obviously, but you don't know what you're doing. There are people out there that do. And for them, it cost them almost double because it took 2 to 3 times the time that it normally would have taken to get rid of the rats because they try to do it themselves. So precaution, DIY and wildlife and pest control. You might get lucky. You might say, "Well, William, I covered up that." Well, you got lucky because most of the time I get a phone call saying, "Well, I tried to do this and now I've got a hole in my ceiling." Well, that's what happens when you try to trap an animal in your attic.
That's really interesting. Like, just hearing you talk about all these kind of things, it kinda puts that in perspective that, yeah, like, absolutely, you don't know what you don't know, right? And that's the real thing right there. Like, there's people that do this for a living, there's people that do it every day. They know the instincts, they know the animal, they know how they operate or how they work, so it's easier to kind of maneuver within that. And then the other thing that I kind of, took from all those misconceptions is the whole humane thing, but more on the idea of all you want or all we want to do, right? Including, I think, right? You can correct me if I'm wrong, but from wildlife companies, all they're trying to do is make sure that the animals realize that the home, right, wherever it is that you're trying to protect, the home is not the right solution for them so that they
Exactly.
just move on, so
Yeah,
that they try and find somewhere else to be, right? Because they're still going to have, they still have all their instincts. They still need to have babies. They still need to breathe. They still need to go all these places and survive the winter, all that kind of stuff. They still have all of that. It's just making sure that the home is, a place that they won't look for or try to get into because they already know that that's not it. That's not the solution, right?
yeah. That's the whole point of the preventative nature, is, well, I don't want any harm to come to the animals. If they have babies and for some reason the mom doesn't come back, I don't want them to die. Well, make sure they can't ever get in your house, period. And then it won't ever be a scenario that you have to address ever. Because I'll tell you, as a
Yeah.
wildlife professional, if I run into a situation like that, I can't stand it. I don't want to be put in that position myself. I don't want to have to be sitting there going, "Oh, the mom didn't come back. I have to find a way to preserve these babies now." I don't want that situation. I want the mom to be happily with her babies in a tree or a log or a burrow, right? not in your attic that I have to take them out to protect your house. I know of
Yeah.
situations that buildings have burnt down because animals have been in the attic. They chewed on a wire, not knowing that what was going to happen. You can't take the risk. So rather than being worried about the animal after the fact, try to invest in the thought of maybe if I deal with this beforehand, then I don't even have to have that question answered.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And does it work the same? I think this is the a question that I had as well. Does it work the same in cities versus suburban areas? I guess when you're out in the country, obviously you're going to be surrounded by a lot more different types of animals. But when you're like in Toronto, right, or Barrie or Orillia or something like that, does it work the same in terms of prevention or in terms of how do you deal with animals?
Yeah, so city to rural, there's actually quite a difference. A lot of, and I've talked about misconceptions. Another misconception that people run into is, oh, well, it's a city. There's not that many animals. There's an estimated million raccoons in Toronto, the city of
Really
Toronto. Yes. Um,
interesting.
the amount of rats in Toronto, you go walking in the dusk time, and the rats will be running across the sidewalk. Like their animals take advantage of scenarios that come forward. The Norway rat cannot live without human intervention. So if you live in the middle of nowhere, you will never have a Norway rat because they need human they can't survive out on their own. They won't go and start collecting grains or seeds or pine cones. They need human garbage or human food or animal food to survive. So there's certain species that they are only based around where there's a populace. And if there isn't a populace, you won't have rats, the Norway rat particularly. Um, but yeah, with raccoons, there raccoons and skunks and possums. I remember I had a call. It was downtown Toronto. This bless her heart, this little lady, little older lady, did not want to sell her house. So she has Toronto skyscrapers all the way around her house. And here's her little, two-story red brick chilling there among skyscrapers. She had squirrels in her attic. She couldn't get rid of them. And everyone would say, "Oh, well, the reason why I've got an animal is because I live in a rural setting." No, animals take advantage of a situation, especially animals like raccoons. Um, they love the dumpsters. I know I don't know if you have, but I know I've seen videos online where I haven't run into this personally, but they open up a bin and there's 15, 20 raccoons chilling inside a dumpster
Oh
because
yeah, I've seen videos like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's where the food is, right? So they become very
Hmm.
versatile, and it actually changes the animals how they conduct themselves as a whole. So what I mean by that is, right now we're actually running into situations where Canada geese aren't flying south anymore. In cities, in areas where like they'll have ponds, where like they'll have hot water reservoirs that kind of just like kick out water from a factory or whatever, the geese will
Mm.
stay because the water's open. Whereas in the winter, normally everything's frozen, right? There's no access for food, but in these certain areas, there is because it's not frozen. And certain farms will have, they don't harvest their crops. The geese will stay because they have a food source. Where 80 years ago, you'd never see a Canada goose in the wintertime. But I've seen them. I've seen situations where the geese are staying now. Like a lot of them are still heading south, don't get me wrong, but they're starting to change that they're realizing they don't need to go south anymore. So they're literally starting to adjust their um instincts.
Interesting.
We're having situations so in the wintertime in the city, animals are a lot more active because streets get cleaned, sidewalks get cleaned, driveways get cleaned, right? So you'll get calls for a raccoon break in the winter down in the city a lot more than you will in rural country because A raccoon can't wallow through 3.5 feet of snow. But if the walkway's shoveled and the driveway's shoveled and your backyard's shoveled and the road's plowed, and you know what I'm saying? So
Yeah,
they can
yeah.
actually function, and it's changing. The animals are actually changing. It's kind of crazy. I know, like, we have a case right now where we have a customer up north who has raccoons, and they're not budging. They didn't want to move the whole winter. You don't run into that very often in the city. Usually, they're out within a couple days to go and see what's going on. But up north, they know that there's 3.5 feet of snow out there. They're not wanting to walk in it. They're only a foot tall. They're gonna get lost, and so they'll wait it out.
Right.
So that's something that's a huge difference between the city and rural country. Is it's actually you actually have to have a different approach, because people will get a raccoon problem, and like I said, they'll wait, and especially in rural areas, don't, because if the animal decides to bog down, you might not be able to access it, and it's going to be above your attic, in your attic, or underneath your house or cottage or whatever for months. um Certain animals don't change too much. Like squirrels, they come out, they go, they do whatever they want. Like it'll be -30 outside Celsius and they'll be outside. They don't get too worked up. They're kind of funny that way. But certain species, like you'll see skunks sometimes in the winter, which is like crazy because they don't move ever. You sometimes see them in the winter in the city moving around because it's warmer, right? You get a more concentrated area of people, everything's a little warmer. You get sewers underground that are a little warmer. Everything's just a bit, and it can adjust the animal's instincts. It's something that we've noted recently. Is the further north we go, the more the animals are to the traditional what we understand. Like, oh, they hibernate, they sleep during the winter or whatever. They have a torpid state for a period of time, but the further south you go, it actually is it's changing.
Interesting. That's really cool. That, there's different ways, like, I guess their instincts change, which is something that I didn't like. Obviously, it makes sense, right? People are adaptable the same way that animals are adaptable, but you wouldn't think, that the things that we do as humans actually have a big effect on how animals and stuff operate, right? In terms of getting into your house and whatnot. I think that's
Yeah,
really, really
it's
interesting.
it's funny. When I was more focused down in the city, we do a lot more northern work now, but when I was focused more in the city, um, I could show up to a call and I would know where the entry point was based on the location I was in. So if I went to, say, Richmond Hill, it would typically be roof vents. If I went to Keswick, it'd be roof soffit intersections. And if I was in Thornhill, it would be plumbing vent mats, the points of entry.
What?
So the vents,
Why is that? Like, how
be
did you know that?
because their mothers train them, and that's how they know how
Interesting.
to get in. Now, obviously, there was the odd time it wasn't like, you would never check the roof soffits if, you know, but it was very consistent. I'd say 80 to 90% consistent, where in these certain locations, it was always the same because they learned from their mothers. So
That's so interesting.
that's the instinct adjustment where you don't run into that so much further north. They'll just pick wherever it's a weak spot. But down in the city, yeah, I remember I'd get up on the roof and be like, this will be a roof vent, and there was a roof vent, and this would be a roof soffit, and there was a roof soffit, and it was kind of uh it was kind of funny because we used to joke, right? Like, well, who feels like doing roof vents today, and who feels like doing roof soffits? I'll send you to Thornhill, or I'll send you to Richmond Hill, or send you to Keswick, right? So that was something that was a bit of a laugh. But yeah, animals. The beauty of animals is in their inconsistencies are consistent, and that's something that you can apply to the business. Is a raccoon um a raccoon might adjust, but you know how far they'll adjust, right? So you always have a bit of a spectrum. Like, you don't usually get blindsided by an animal because they always stay within a certain instinct to a certain point. That's the good thing about animals. Is yeah, they might change a bit, but a raccoon's still going to have between 1 and 7 babies in between the dates of March and May, right? So you might get
Yeah.
blindsided on the odd occasion, but it's for the most part it's always consistent. So that's a nice part of working with wildlife. Is, you kind of know, once you recognize patterns, you kind of can anticipate them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. And for people that want to know more about, like the types of animals that you guys help with, or, like the services that you guys do and stuff like that, I guess, can you tell people like the website, your website, and, social handles, whatever you want?
So we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we have an X account. Um, to be honest, I'm not huge on the social media side, so I don't know the exact names, but they're all under Exit Wildlife. At Exit Wildlife. I got the handle on all those. You can visit our website as well. We have a big breakdown specifically on different species and bugs and animals, right down to snakes, birds. We get possums and the like, groundhogs. Bugs wise, we discussed about ants and the like, but we get a lot of wasp calls. That's something that is another thing that you should try to leave to a professional, especially if you're allergic. And Yeah, so you can find us our website. You can find us if you Google us. Um, we Yeah, we're out there. We try to keep everything updated and adjusted, and new things kind of come up, and we're running into new species that are moving in certain areas. Like up north here now, we're running into the Massasauga rattlesnake, which is something that you hadn't heard of for a while. Usually they were further north, but they're starting to move south. So sometimes we have to adjust as we go. Um, in in certain aspects. And sometimes, like I said, sometimes a lot of time we'll get completely blindsided by an animal that we haven't run into before. And I know some fellas where um they ran into a situation where they thought they were dealing with raccoons under a trailer and it was otters. So you sometimes you have to adjust. But yeah, so a lot of our info is on the website. We're willing to tackle most anything. We might not have the answers for you, but we'll get them if we can. And we sometimes, especially with certain species like snakes and the like, we can't make promises, but we'll come and take a look. A lot of companies they don't like doing certain species because they're difficult, but sometimes you just got to take a look, and it's not as difficult as you thought.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Will. I think that was a lot of really great information. Like I learned quite a bit actually.
Well, thank you.
So I think this is going to be very useful for other people as well.
I appreciate the opportunity to be on this. As you might have noticed, I'm very passionate about talking about this stuff, and I appreciate when I find someone that's willing to listen for a period of time. I appreciate that a lot. My poor friends, I always got stories for them, and they're like, "I don't know if I want to think about that possibly happening to my house." I said, "Well, I can help you." So thank you very much. This has been wonderful.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the entire episode. All the links and info you heard in this conversation will be featured in the show notes on our website, villagermagazine.ca/podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing to our channels like YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you're listening from, so you never miss an episode. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.